or Marion or somebody. Oh, thank you for getting the recording going. Welcome everyone to the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee meeting. We have a brief meeting today, really just to touch base and review sort of what's been going on since our last meeting, and especially at the council level as they sort of take things over from the subcommittees at this point. So we should at least look at our December 13th minutes. And I don't know if anybody has if that's in the chat, or if somebody can easily put that in the chat. I can, if nobody else can.
I can do it.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. Basically, if you recall, on December 13th, we really just went through our priority actions and the presentation that we wanted to provide to the council on the 20th. So it should be a reflection of that. But if anybody has any corrections or anything that needs to be made, why don't we take a minute to spin through those and just get that out of the way. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll see if we can approve them. Is everybody okay with approving those minutes, or is there any corrections or anything needed to change those?
The link doesn't seem to be working with me on the phone or the computer. I don't know if it's just me, but
oh,
I just got it.
Just got it, meaning in the chat?
The link, yeah, I just saw it in the chat, and it did work. The link did work for me.
Okay.
I can put the link in just to the calendar event, Mike. Maybe it's just the way that I'm sharing it. But if you have a calendar event, then click the meeting minutes link. Maybe that'll work.
actually it worked now in the chat. It didn't work on the website, but now I've got it. Thanks.
Okay, excellent, thanks. David, we're just going over the minutes and making sure we can approve those from the last time that we met. So we're just taking a minute to do that.
There's one.
Sorry, I know. Sorry about that confusion. So used to using Teams when I set it up originally. I just went with that.
There's one small typo, which I think is kind of humorous, which is under 213, talking pints. So I think the council would appreciate talking pints.
Thank you. I guarantee you that was something that I put in, since I often have those types of errors in my typing and reading. Subliminal thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so can we consider those with the correction of pints to points? Can we consider those approved?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And so let's move on. So I just wanted to try to go through this quickly, but I think it's very important, of course, to acknowledge that we have David Mears with us today, and he is the new co-chair, a new, or I guess you can clarify, David, if it's a returning council member. So I will turn it over to you, David, to introduce yourself, and then if we can just quickly spin around just so you know who's on the subcommittee, and have other people introduce themselves. David and I have already met, so David, go ahead.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, David Mears. I'm currently working with the law firm of Tarrant Gillies and Shims. I've served for a while on the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee back when the first round of the first report was done. So I have some experience with this. But I've only been in the law firm for about a year. Before that, I was at Audubon, Vermont. I've been a law professor at Vermont Law School, and also served for a while in state government in the Department of Environmental Conservation. So that's my background. I'm excited to kind of figure out how to take the work that you all have done and work with the other council members to put something useful forward for the policymakers to consider.
Great, thanks, David. And let's just go around and I will just call on people the way you're appearing on my screen right now. So Scott, just a quick introduction so we can spin through that. I think that would be great.
All right. Hello, David. My name is Scott McCormick. I'm semi-retired, my family says. I spent probably 45 years working on environmental management, transboundary river basins, and climate change adaptation, mostly in Africa, but also in Asia and somewhat in the Caribbean.
Wow.
Alice?
Hi, David. I'm Alice Beal. I'm a Waitsfield Planning Commissioner, and I'm also a Central Vermont Regional Planning District rep, currently working on the new CVRPC Regional Plan, chairing that committee. And I'm actually on a mission to get included more climate change and disaster recovery mitigation information into the regional plan.
Thanks, Alice. Marion, have you and David met yet? Have you crossed paths?
Yes, but hi, David.
Okay.
Nice to meet you. Marion Knowles with the Climate Action Office.
Okay, great. Anne?
Hi, David. I'm Ann Lawless. I'm on the select board in the town of Wheelock. And I have a part-time job doing outreach for Heat Squad home energy audits in the Northeast Kingdom. And I'm spending most of my time now with our application to FEMA for damage to way too much in the town of Wheelock. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Bronwyn?
Hi, David. Really nice to meet you. I'm Bronwyn Cook. I'm a Community Planning and Policy Manager in the Department of Housing and Community Development. My general professional background has been in the climate mitigation, climate adaptation space, particularly at the local planning level. Just a really quick story. Promise it's very quick, but my brother attended Vermont Law School, and when I first moved to Vermont, he was trying to do the big brother, help his sister out, and he was like, yeah, you should really look up David Mears. So it's nice 3 years later to finally close that loop and meet you face to face.
And Margolis?
Hey, David. Ann Margolis, the Deputy Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Department of Public Service. Nice to see you.
David Dean? Probably have met.
Good morning. David Mears and I have been working together since he hit Vermont in all of my various iterations. So welcome aboard, David.
Eric?
If I can get David, good to see you again. David and I sat next to each other all last Monday for 6 hours of Climate Action Council meetings. So nice to see you.
Good. Jared?
Good morning. Hi, David. I'm Jared Ulmer. I manage the Climate and Health program at the Department of Health, and I'm staff support on this committee. Thanks.
Yay, and you're outside. That's great. I'm jealous. Liz, I imagine you may have also met David already.
Yeah, great to see you, David. Liz with the Climate Action Office.
Michael Burke.
Hi, David. Mike Burke, GMP. I lead operations for GMP, and I'm pretty sure you and I have worked together back when you were at DEC still. So we're familiar as well. Good to see you.
Thank you. Otis.
Hi, nice to meet you, David. I don't believe we've crossed paths before. I work for Andrea. I'm also state staff support here over at VTrans. I focus on our transportation resilience planning work. So nice to meet you.
Stephanie.
Hi, David. We've met. We did a panel together last year, but Stephanie Smith, Hazard Mitigation Section Chief at Vermont Emergency Management. And Caroline Paskey is usually on these meetings as well. She's on my team. She's our lead planner. So you'll see her sometimes too.
Yeah. And then Sue Plant. You're muted, Sue. Sue, you're muted.
all that talking for nothing.
Sorry to wear you out.
I'm Sue Plant. I'm the one that takes the minutes to these meetings. I work for Vermont Emergency Management, and I'm the administrative assistant to the director.
Awesome. Thanks. I think I got everybody, but if not, speak up. So that's been our committee. A lot of people, there's more, a bunch of people who couldn't be here today too, but I'm sure we'll cross paths as the work continues here too. So thank you for that. I just wanted to start off, I guess, with bringing you all up to speed and what has happened since we last met. We met on the 13th to prepare for the council meeting on the 16th, where the committee reviewed the priority actions. And so that was the main focus of that December 16th meeting. I can, at some point here, I've got some links of what was shared there, but you all are very familiar. Probably, if you, like me, still have to remind yourself on what our priority actions actually were and what was brought up. Again, I can drop those in the chat, but that was the focus of the December 16th meeting, really just a report out from the subcommittees on what work had occurred and how that culminated in priorities for our group.
Andrea,
ahead,
I don't know how many of us were there. I was there, and I thought Andrea presented our findings in our PowerPoint slides and reports. I thought Andrea did an excellent job.
Thank you, Alice. Appreciate that. Just gonna pop this in the chat, and then I think the next meeting was January 13th, and so the steering committee for the council and the council itself is meeting on an aggressive schedule right now. Pretty much each meeting at least every other week. I think there's been some weeks where they've met each week. So yeah, they've got a lot going on, a lot of work to be done in a short time frame. So the January 13th meeting really was an overview of the drafting expectations, the responsibilities of who was going to draft the different sections. And then they had to provide some input on the priority actions through a survey that they completed before that meeting. They then met again this Monday, as Eric mentioned, for 6 hours and mostly in person. And that meeting was a little bit more comprehensive, providing the council members into a look at the whole set of recommendations and providing input on that. Really pretty much the only opportunity that they were going to have to look at the whole suite of recommendations and not just focusing on the priority actions. So kind of starting with the bigger picture, and then as they start drafting, certainly a greater focus on the priority actions. There was, I think, some further discussion on how many priority actions overall to include and what that focus on the priority actions would look like in the plan. And then some discussion also on the timeline of the climate action plan, the recommendations that go into it, and also what's happening in the legislature over the session and how those sort of mesh or don't mesh very well. So those are the meetings that have occurred, and I would open it up to any of the council members that are here to provide further input, or people that have attended those meetings. If there's any key takeaways from any of those meetings, we can get more into what the draft is going to look like in a later agenda topic, and the responsibilities and sort of timeline for that. But any insights or anything that folks wanted to share is now the time to do that.
I can very briefly kind of share just a couple of reflections that won't be, I think, all that useful, but will give you a sense of some of my anxiety about this process. We spent an inordinate amount of time in the conversation, as Andrew described, kind of reflecting on the broad suite of kind of recommendations that were out there. And it didn't feel like the best use of time to me, that chunk of time, because we were kind of looking at the non-priority actions, which we don't really have time for that. So, but there was it was very useful that we met in person. As a new council member, it was terrific for me to kind of have a chance to have the more informal kind of space to engage with folks. You know, and as Eric mentioned, I got a chance to visit with him and know him a little better. So that was that was useful. And there was some high level thinking, and I think I came away with a much better understanding of kind of some of the timelines, some of the broader political issues. It was one interesting thing was that for the administration, it was slightly awkward in that it was the day before the governor's address to the legislature, in which he was announcing kind of pulling back on some of the climate related stuff. So the administration officials, Sarah and Julie and others, had to kind of bring that into the room. But it was, I thought on balance, a really, a good discussion. I just feel like I'm personally feeling if we're going to meet a deadline of giving something to the legislature by the summer, we really have to put the metal down, pedal to the metal on terms of getting some of our ideas and paper in a way that is useful to policymakers. So when we talk more about kind of next steps, I would welcome all of your input into thinking how to help those of us who are drafting or are on the council kind of narrow and focus the proposals in a way that's useful.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. And I think what I was concerned with is there's no flexibility on the date due, the July date for the Climate Council plan draft to the legislature. We've talked about that here, and some members here have already expressed concern about the timeline and how rushed we can feel. So I was concentrating on that. And the other thing that struck me was from the Secretary of Administration's previews to us about Phil Scott's budget was a different timeline and metrics for carbon dioxide for carbon dioxide emissions and for energy goals. It sounded like those metrics are going to be reduced, but also compressed on a faster timeline. I don't know if I was mistaken about that, but that's what I heard, I think.
Yeah.
I just want to add something as well, David. I watched a little bit of the meeting on whatever the day of this, I can't remember what day it was this week, but the council meeting this week. And I thought Chris Campany had a very good comment at one point, which is the current cap has, I don't know, 270 some odd actions in it. The new one's going to have probably a similar number of actions. And I think Chris's point is very valid, especially given the uncertainty of the federal funding that we might be seeing for weatherization and other programs, is trying to narrow down really high priorities. We use the criteria that we were given before by the steering committee and the council to prioritize high, medium, low. But amongst the high ones, or even some of the medium ones, trying to think of other criteria maybe that would help you narrow down some of the actions. For example, can it be done in 4 years? Is there a political will within the agencies to implement these programs? Whatever criteria might be useful, but out of the 200 plus, what are the top 20 that can get done in 4 years? I thought Chris was very, very articulate about that.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, Scott. Definitely a lot to consider on the feasibility aspect of where we're at right now. So really, I think the drafting is supposed to focus on priorities, but even the way things were put forth or where they stand at this point, there is certainly more than 20 priority actions. And so I'm not sure if anybody has any input or reflections on if that was discussed at the meeting or what that discussion entailed. Maybe we could take a few minutes to do that, but David, Dean, go ahead first.
as sort of a reaction to this discussion about the deadlines, the legislature is going to open up the entire act. I mean, the administration has made it clear that they want things changed, and once the act is open, so can the dates. And so if there is rock bottom concern about, gee, we may not be able to meet this, now's the time to be talking to the legislature about changing those dates. And I know part of the angst of this group is that, along with everything else in those bills, they're enforceable. And so missing a deadline gets to be of concern. That could also be softened in some way. And as a few of you have heard me say over the years, there's no jail time associated with not meeting a legislative deadline. All right. And so, but as opposed to simply taking it unto ourselves to ignore what the legislature sent out, I think we ought to open a dialogue about shifting those dates if you have that level of concern.
Yeah, certainly something that would be, I think, an interesting conversation at the council level for sure. And one of those things that sort of is happening, during the legislative session as well, as, and on a parallel path for what has to happen and how the council decides that they want to contribute to that conversation. But David Mears or others, was there anything more about refining or limiting the amount of priorities that are ultimately, like, is there a top 10 or 20, or do you recall?
There was not a decision around that. I just building on kind of Scott's reflection of Chris's comments. I think Chris Camp and I shared a perspective that rather than pick a number and try to meet that number, that really what we need to do is I think we should honor the work of the subcommittees already that they've done and stick with the priority actions. Now, whether there's a subset of those actions that, don't make it into the final plan or not, I don't really have a strong opinion, but I think that we should, that the Climate Council should come up with think about it the other way around. Like, what do we want the key, attributes to be of the recommendations that we're making? Like, they're actionable, they're doable, it's hard to guess what's actually politically viable, but to the extent that we can capture the concept of whether this is actually something that could take root without giving up on the basic premise that I think all of us share, which is we know we need transformational change to drive to really achieve some of our broader goals. So not reducing our ambitions in the long term, but in the short term, thinking about what are the key proposals that are going to get us across the finish line. And I'm looking forward to chatting a little further on this call to think about what some of those criteria might be, and also a couple of key questions I think that we should ask ourselves, like, are there connections with the ag and ecosystems priority actions and their strategies, and or connections with the cross-cutting subcommittees recommendations and strategies that we should capture and lift up somehow, or at least acknowledge. And then secondly, is there any additional work that we should do to ask that we should present to the Climate Council as a whole to say how we're going to turn some of these strategies into actions? What are the next steps that need to happen for each one of these to make them actually happen?
Yep. And I think we can get into that a little bit more detail and really start to hear from subcommittee members and their thoughts on that. Alice, let's hear from you and then continue on the agenda.
I just want to drop something as we talk about the tight deadline. And David, I agree with you, and both Davids, I agree with both of you. For our RPC regional plan, what we're looking at is to proceed and make our deadline for when our new regional plan is due. Concern being, especially within the energy chapter, some data that we don't think is, well, at least I don't think is completely current. And we expect changes. So what we're going to do is proceed with what we have now, meet our deadline, and then be prepared over the next year, 2 years, to go back and do some edits in that regional plan. And I don't know if this could be something to consider for this climate action plan also. And I think that's what the council was saying. Proceed with what we know now and what all the committees reporting in have presented. And because that's still the law. We just have to wait and see what happens with the legislature and the governor.
That's an interesting concept, especially with the measuring and assessing progress tool being developed and implemented over that time, and then sort of having a better basis or a better data.
Yeah, I was just to mention that, I was very impressed with the ERG consultants, and I'm kind of consultant critical. So I felt very positive about their presentation and how much they listened to the input from attendees. And they actually were very good at asking for suggestions on where to pursue good data. So
that's great.
Yes, that's another one.
If anybody did not catch it yesterday, there was, I think, what was called a public meeting on the measuring and assessing progress tool. It could have been a stakeholder or a public. I'm not exactly sure how it was framed, but I believe that was recorded and can be shared also when it's posted, or if it's already posted. I don't know, Liz or Marion, if you're able to do that. But so let's move on for what the council has planned ahead of them. The ultimate goal, or the most immediate goal, is for there to be a preliminary draft by March 1st. And the council will have a chance to review that and comment on it and provide input with a more final draft. I don't want to call it a final draft, but an actual draft to go out to the public with over April. And Marion or Liz I don't know if Liz is still here or not. Oh yeah, you are. Jump in if I'm getting those time frames in getting them wrong, but April, go out to the public stakeholders, get more input, and then work over May to incorporate that input with a final draft complete and signed off on by the middle of June. So that's the goal. There's a meeting on February 10th, which will focus a lot on the Cap and Invest study, almost exclusively, I think, but probably, or maybe half of the meeting is going to be dedicated to the report out of the Cap and Invest study that has been occurring at, it was an amendment to the last action plan, or the current action plan, I guess I should say, and then required by the legislature for A&R and AOT to partner and look at the potential benefits or impacts to Vermonters from joining a Cap and Invest program. And so that report out is on February 10th. Yes, February 10th. I don't think there's another meeting until March 10th, and I believe that is to review the preliminary draft, and then March 31st to approve the draft plan. And like I said before, going out to the public, and the council, of course, will be invited and participate in those public meetings too, I'm sure. So that's sort of the outlook. I mentioned that at one of the meetings, the council reviewed drafting expectations. And what those expectations are is that The sections will be only about 3 to 5 pages each. So it is supposed to be a condensed, focused plan, focus on the new and top priority actions. There's supposed to be a template coming soon, I think, from the Climate Action Office. If it's not already drafted, it's coming soon. Yeah, and then preliminary drafts, like I said, by March 1st. So for drafting responsibilities, the Climate Action Office is going to be taking on several sections of the plan, doing administrative and technical sections. And then council members are responsible for drafting around the subcommittee recommendations. And David has been assigned the lead for writing the Ag and Eco section, and Chris Campany, who, as you all know, is on this subcommittee but is not able to be here today, has been tasked with leading the writing for the rural resilience and adaptation sections. And so we've had some conversations in how our actions and the ag and ecosystems actions recommendations might overlap, because we had talked about this several times, but we never really got a chance to work with them and understand what overlap there could be between those sections. Both of them certainly have a resilience aspect. So we have met a couple of times and talked with Ag and Eco about that overlap and how we might approach that. And I think right now what David and Chris want to do is just sort of start in on the writing and see what gaps exist from their perspectives, digging through what has been provided to them, and then reach out to the subcommittees to fill those gaps with the expertise here, or with help with research, or reaching out to other people who might not be on this group but are the subject matter experts. So that is one way subcommittees will be involved in the work going forward. But we had talked about also the potential need for some sort of subgroup, a couple of members maybe from rural resilience and a couple of members from ag and eco, to really dig into what that overlap is and pick out some overarching themes to write about together, because we shouldn't be writing these two things like without crossing over and without considering. We may have that same narrative that needs to be incorporated from the work that we did with cross-sector and the overlap of recommendations and how we kind of reconcile those. So I think that should probably also be included in the writing. So I think Chris will need some help from Scott, maybe you as the lead in that overlap with cross-sector mitigation, or just something that I want to make sure that we don't leave behind. So that's sort of the conversations that we've been having as drafting really is just getting started, or barely getting started. So I don't know, David, if you have anything more to add to that, or if people have questions on what that really means or looks like. I don't know how much, we can define that right now. I don't know if we'll have regular subcommittee check-ins. I think this sort of has to grow right now and see where it goes, and see what the needs are of the two leads who are drafting, and come together as needed. But certainly we can be communicating along the way of the progress that's being made, and hopefully you all will stay tuned into what's happening at the council level through the calendar and those sorts of things. I don't know.
If I could, maybe just to spur a little discussion from the group, I'll make a straw proposal where I think we're all kind of inventing this as we go. So if anyone feels like there's a grand plan that they don't want to meddle with, don't worry. I don't think there's a grand plan. So I'm anticipating I'll get this template fairly shortly, and I'm already starting to start to craft the ag and ecosystems, kind of what are the high level themes, and starting to plug stuff in. So, and I know Chris is in the same place. I doubt that this is going to be so clean that we have, fully complete, thoughtful drafts for these subcommittees to look at and weigh in on. I think it'll be just a little messier than that. But one thought that I've had, in addition, I liked Andrea's suggestion, that we maybe if any subgroup of you were willing to kind of do a little mini work group with Ag and Ecosystems, just to kind of compare the two sets of priority recommendations and look for intersections or themes that could be helpful. I think another thing that could be helpful to me, I was just looking at the recommendations, the spreadsheet for public health category of your priority recommendations, and there's some are quite, have a fair amount of detail that I could imagine fairly easily turning into we recommend that the legislature or the administration give greater funding to this agency to do this action. But there's one or two of them that just say like increase funding to local communities for mental health services, and doesn't spell it out in a lot more detail. And it may be that somewhere there's a piece of paper that has that detail, or it may be that you as a subcommittee just never quite got there. But that would be the kind of thing that would be useful to be able to add that additional kind of thinking, like because I don't know that particular area of policy is who's responsible for that, which agency, which source of funding, or does it mean a new source of funding? Those kinds of things might be helpful.
Yeah, great. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question actually for David, more than, and sort of a comment question, but I was the coordination between the rural resilience and the cross-sector mitigation. I spent most of my time with the thermal buildings group. And one of their first actions under the first pathway and strategy was to increase weatherization in X number of homes. And I was hoping that they would have come up with a target for that before they were submitted to the council, but I think it's still X in the council's document. So relevant to what you were just saying about public health, the question is, how are these targets going to be set? Right now, there's a target of, I think, 120,000 homes by 2030 to be weatherized in the state, and 40,000 have been hit. So how many of the 80,000 are going to be hit, and who determines that sort of target?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Climate Council, right, is the final arbiter of what goes in the report. So it would be the Climate Council, but there's no, we've got a short amount of time, and unless someone puts forward that information and a recommendation, and unless one of the Climate Council members, which includes agency heads, so some of them may, bring some of that to the table. But in the absence of that, like I would have no idea what to recommend. Or how to evaluate
hopefully there's a similar effort going on with the drafting members of cross-sector, and that would be a gap, like how can I write something about this if what is the target? Where are we at? And so hopefully that's happening there as well. Yeah, something is for you to stay tuned to, or maybe follow up with David, forgetting his name.
Farnsworth.
Yeah, it is a David, right? Yeah, so I think that's great. And maybe Alice, you'll speak to this, but just going back to what David Mears just asked about sort of more specificity on the public health actions, or some of the public health actions. Is there input to be had on that right now? Or is there a way that one of us would want to follow up with Chris or David on that?
Yes. One thing to know, David, and the rest of the group knows this, is that public health is a whole new part of the climate action plan. So we had the advantage, I think it was an advantage, of thinking about this from scratch and how it fits in to climate change. And mental health bubbled up as very important. Our overarching feeling was that it's really a matter of how do we stay healthy, which really is, in my mind, the whole point of a climate action plan. How do people stay healthy, and deliver public health in an equitable way. So I think two important parts of this, and Jared can speak to this a little more, which is why I want to talk to Stephanie too, is not developing what are called resilience hubs, community resilience hubs. And that came up as a very strong recommendation. So what we have in our recommendations and suggested actions are the ones that we really, really, really honed in on as what would be important to public health and what wasn't covered in any other RRA committee, subcommittee. So, yeah, I mean, just contact any one of us. And the one who's going to speak to it on the Climate Council is Dr. Levine, who's not here today, I don't think. But it was really an excellent group of, I think, public health representatives on that small task group.
Thanks, Alice. That's very helpful. And I think there will be a lot of that, of kind of just reaching out to the various experts from Chris, for instance, with regard to this subcommittee's recommendations, and I'll be doing that with ag and ecosystems. One thing, this is just based on my own personal experience with policymaking, that ideally we've got something that comes out and we, the public, can look back in 4 or 5 years and say, we did that or didn't do that, as opposed to, and that, which doesn't mean we shouldn't say things that are absolutely true. I experienced this after Irene, that mental health and social services issues were vastly underappreciated as a critical component of resilience. So we need to say that, and then at the same time say things like, how will we know if we've made progress on this? And it may be just a step in that direction, but what is it that's missing right now at Health and Human Services, or or what would it take to stand up those resilience hubs?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Bronwyn.
I guess I just wanted to try and share some sentiment that's been shared in the rural resilience. And I'm not trying to speak for everybody. I'll just speak for myself. Something that I've brought up, I guess, quite often in the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee is, I think, kind of a fundamental issue in David, exactly what you're saying, trying to be concrete. What are these concrete things we can do, but also how do we know we're making progress? And I think the challenge in the rural resilience and adaptation is that, we've been following this process that's been set up based on how to prioritize mitigation actions, and mitigation actions have a very clear metric, a very clear outcome, whether you agree with it or not. And that makes it easier to do things like evaluate co-benefits, evaluate just the impact of the action itself. With resilience and adaptation, we haven't had that benefit of what is the final outcome? What's the metric we are trying to measure these actions against? There's the Science and Data Subcommittee, existed, but it's been very much focused on emissions reductions. Alice, to your point, there's all, emissions reductions primarily for the purpose of meeting those global warming solutions targets, but there's all these co-benefits to public health around reducing particulate matter. We have a hard time talking about these actions in those terms. And then the other big piece of this is when it's disaggregated, when we are talking about actions in these different sectors for these different outcomes, it makes it really difficult to then be strategic. Kind of back to something we were saying earlier on is, what are the top priorities for the next 4 years? That's one way of looking at prioritizing. But one of the things we've talked about is a lot of the things in our action list, they don't do much as a standalone. They're one step in a much longer process. And so the other way to develop criteria is, yes, this can and should be done in the next 4 years, but what does it then lead to that we know is a package of things to really achieve that outcome? That whole process of really being strategic has been really challenging, particularly in the adaptation space, because we just don't have the benefit of some pretty a long history of measuring and accounting and identifying the metric for meeting that goal. So just for the benefit of David, I guess, David Mears to be specific, that's a lot of the conversation that's also been happening in the rural resilience, and still trying to do the work while dealing with some of those kind of fundamental issues and how we're doing the work.
Yeah, same
Yeah.
exact issue for ag and ecosystems.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Bronwyn, and bringing it to the forefront again, because it is super critical, I think, that be acknowledged and addressed in the plan. And so I know Chris definitely has very similar feelings about that and has all kinds of thoughts on how to address that. But yeah, thanks again for bringing it up. So is there anyone right now, based on what you've heard today, which is not that much, interested and willing to volunteer if we move forward with a group or a task group that is looking to work with Ag and Eco and find that overlap in the themes? Probably, 2 or 3 people we would be looking for to try to help identify what those are, and so that the writing can make those connections. And so that we can have to a point that Marian has been definitely on top of the whole time that we were drafting these recommendations, is that we want to have actions. We want to have things that are actionable and that we can really move forward and make a difference. So anyway, is there anybody who might be interested in doing that, who is able to? I'll give you a minute to think about it.
Andrea, I'm not sure I know what that means, volunteering, right? Like if there's something in somebody's wheelhouse of subject matter expert, I think we would probably all make ourselves available to answer questions, give input, things like that. But it depends on Chris's writing, right? And where he's going with. So I almost wonder if we should ask Chris who he thinks might be helpful. Not to put pressure on him, but I'm just trying to think. Yeah, just a thought.
I mean, maybe I'm thinking about this in the wrong way, but I think that is definitely going to be needed as the real writing happens. But to sort of set up a framework for sort of initiating the writing, I just think there's like a more pragmatic set of tasks that has to happen by just really like pulling up the recommendations of both ones and saying like, oh, look, there's definitely something similar here in Ag and Eco and it overlaps with what was recommended by Rural Resilience. And so just sort of making those connections and themes. Go ahead, David.
No, I was just thinking a friendly amendment, Andrew, because just listening to Michael's point, which makes sense. I mean, one thing that I'm thinking I might be able to do with Ag and Ecosystems, for instance, maybe I send out a list of like, here are what I think are the key questions that I'm struggling with as I'm drafting this.
Yeah.
Here's the issues I need help with, and then send it out to the full subcommittee. And anybody who wants to volunteer to tackle that, and we can just do it kind of by email rather than kind of setting up new subgroups and having to manage those meetings. So for instance, the questions I might ask of Ag and Ecosystems might be similar to what Chris would ask, but for instance, I'm seeing a gap. It doesn't seem like their recommendations emphasize some of the opportunities for forest protection as much as they could, and I need someone to help me like figure out what, if we were going to enhance the forest components of this, what would we add? I am interested in seeing if the Ag and Ecosystems folks have actually looked at your recommendations and see any overlap or intersection, and I might ask them to help look at that as a group, and then who knows what other questions will pop up. But maybe that's a way to engage folks, and then whoever's got the time and energy and interest or expertise can weigh in as they can.
Yeah, I definitely agree that as you start writing, those questions will come up, like you referenced the forestry, and hope and expect that you all would be reaching out to the subcommittees. And maybe it's what I'm asking is something that, you know, I as a co-chair can reach out to one of the co-chairs of Ag and Eco and sort of try to pull out those high level themes, just so that we're not drafting in a silo and not thinking of it more holistically. So we'll put any specific requests from subcommittee members on hold for now and go from there. And wait to hear from David and Chris as they start drafting. And I don't think that we have any members of the public on right now, but I did want to just open it up in case we do for public comment. Okay, I don't think we do. So I think we kind of just summarized what next steps would be for David and Chris to really start digging in and, you know, reach out to subcommittees when they do need help, or and they can help us stay tuned to what is being developed and coming out. So I don't know if there's any more, if anybody else is taking any more tangible next steps from our conversation today, but if so, please add those now. I'm just trying to read the chat at the same time, but.
Well, it's
And
a
I
real
guess-
pleasure to get to meet
Sorry.
you all and some of you again.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make sure that you as a subcommittee feel tuned in if you want to be. I sort of trying to get that pulse of the whole subcommittee, and I'm sure nobody's looking to go to, like, you know, 3 more meetings a month for the next 6 months. But I also want to make sure that you're being plugged in. So if there's something that you want to contribute or add or have thoughts on how to be involved, just reach out to David and I, and we can work to make that happen. Okay, happy Friday. It's been a week. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
Scott, do you have something else?
I just wanted to ask Ann Lawless if I could reach out to her sometime and talk about her outreach and engagement activities with HEAT. I'm just going to put my phone number in the chat.
Okay, Scott, that would be a pleasure.
All right.
All right, get that quick because sometimes the chat goes away.
I can
There it is.
also email.
802.
Yeah, because once I leave the meeting, the meeting ends.
1267.
All
Got
right.
it.
All
Thank
right.
you, Marion.
Okay.
Thank
You
you
got it,
all.
Nick? We're good?
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks
All
all.
right, thanks everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.